Ебанет, не ебанет? Ебанет.
Ukraine unleashed a hellish symphony upon Russia this time. Moscow is engulfed in catastrophic flames. Targets were struck one after another along a broad front stretching from the oil depots in Smolensk to Moscow and Leningrad, and from Belgorod and Kursk to the infrastructure in Donbass. Now, as Russia burns on all sides, the people have lost their patience. Anger and panic have taken to the streets, because on September 11th, swarms of drones darkened the sky, and even underground shelters were no longer safe. Claims that new generation Flamingo long-range cruise missiles were used in this wave of attacks plunged millions of Russians in Moscow and its surroundings into deep anxiety. There is no official confirmation of the use of Flamingo missiles yet. However, the accuracy, strike power, and successive explosions suggest that munitions beyond the ordinary were deployed. The Ukrainian-made Flamingo missile, with its 1,150-kilogram warhead and 3,000-kilometer range, particularly fuels this concern. When we delve into the details, you will understand why the Russians are right to be nervous. More than 220 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles staged a veritable show of force. The first flames rose in the darkness of night, exploding in the Smolensk countryside. The target was the fully operational Lukoil oil depot in the Kardymovo settlement, which had previously been set ablaze by Ukrainian UAVs. Last year, only 2 of the 16 tanks here survived the fire. Now, the unfinished wreckage has become a target once again. Footage circulating on social media shows the drone, locked onto its target along a programmed route, approaching the terminal and crashing directly into it. In the audio accompanying the footage, off-camera commentators can be heard confirming that the target belonged to the Lukoil facility. The latest attack also engulfed the 9 storage tanks that were still standing. All of them were reduced to ashes once again in the resulting fire. At the same time, alarms were also sounding in Penza. A series of explosions occurred in the regional natural gas pipeline connected to the primary oil pipeline surrounding the city. According to local sources, these explosions were not coincidental. They were directly linked to military shipments and facility activity. The nerve centers of the energy infrastructure were targeted. Far to the northwest, the Port of Primorsk, known as Russia's energy gateway to Europe, was also caught up in the wave of attacks. This giant terminal in the Leningrad Oblast is the largest export point for crude oil shipped across the Baltic Sea. That night, drones spotted in the skies over Primorsk engulfed a ship in the port in flames. At the same time, a fire at one of the pumping stations halted operations for hours. The intensity of the fire and the height of the smoke created a state of emergency around the port. And while all this was happening, the capital, Moscow, was not spared either. The Naro Fominsk region, located approximately 70 kilometers southwest of Moscow, echoed with intense air defense activities during the night. According to Russian sources, numerous anti-aircraft systems were activated in the airspace above the region. Local residents reported hearing successive explosions in the sky and seeing flashes that turned night into day in some places. It is clear that this region is not a random target. Since the Soviet era, Naro Fominsk has been considered one of Russia's most symbolic and prestigious settlements for its land forces. The 4th Guards Kantemirovskaya tank division stationed here is a showcase unit among the Russian Army's armored forces. This division, which has high representational power both in Kremlin ceremonies and on the battlefield, also played important roles in the war in Ukraine. However, it is not yet clear whether the target was directly this military base when the air defense systems were activated. Some military observers suggest that unmanned aerial vehicles pose a general threat around Moscow, and that the target may not only be the Kantemirovskaya base, but also radar systems or military command centers in the area. It should also be noted that the Naro Fominsk region is home not only to tank units, but also to various electronic warfare elements, supply units, and command and control infrastructure. Therefore, the possibility of an attack could be part of a broader operation aimed at disrupting Russia's rear preparations. Such operations also have a social and psychological dimension. Exploding pipelines, burning oil depots, and unusable logistics terminals crippled the fuel system. The succession of these attacks bears the hallmarks of a disruption strategy aimed at economic breathing space, rather than a frontline offensive. The Russian government was forced to restrict gasoline exports at the end of July. However, this restriction was not a solution, but merely a temporary curtain to save face. Behind the curtain, a deepening crisis was growing. Domestically, prices on the A95 line have increased by nearly 50% since the beginning of the year. Sales were curtailed at some stations, while others closed their shutters due to a lack of fuel. Pumps in the southern regions, the occupied territories of Ukraine, and the Far East remained empty for days. The queues were not just made up of vehicles, but also of anger, panic, and despair. Some waited for hours with plastic jerry cans in their hands. Some queued up with their children in the cold morning air, and some pushed their vehicles to the station. Bus services are being cancelled. Schools and workplaces are empty due to the transportation crisis. A tank of gasoline now costs the equivalent of a family's monthly food expenses in Moscow. Moreover, this crisis is affecting not only individuals, but also agriculture and industry. In southern Russia, combine harvesters in the fields cannot start. There is no diesel. Trucks cannot transport grain loads. Wheat ears bend in the wind, but there is no one to harvest them. Grain is left in the fields to rot. Russia's food weapon is now just a memory. Industry is feeling the same pain. Steel factories are halting production, chemical plants are operating at reduced capacity, truck fleets are falling silent. Thousands of workers in small towns are being forced to take leave. When the production chain stops, it's not just the machines that stop, but families too. From the capital Moscow to St. Petersburg, from Kursk to Kazan, every city wakes up wondering where the next attack will come from. Will it fall on our neighborhood tonight? Is now the most real inner voice echoing in Moscow's apartment buildings. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United 24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main topic. Housing ads are quietly being taken down. No one is investing in land under the threat of war anymore. Hotels are empty, concerts are cancelled, theatres are closing their curtains. Schools are closing every few days due to alarms. The voice of cultural life has given way to sirens and panic-filled announcements. A quiet but profound change is taking place in Russia's major cities. The face of cities is shaped not only by concrete, but also by people. And today, centers like Moscow, Yekaterinburg, and Kazan are trying to fill the void left by a vanishing social class with a new crowd. The country's educated, creative, mobile middle class, engineers, academics, IT specialists, and cultural sector workers are leaving one after another. Some have already left, others are still trying to pack their bags. The void left behind by those who have departed is being filled by a new class, those who profit from the war. Those enriched by defense industry contracts, bureaucrats appointed in occupied territories, and the newly wealthy rising through private military companies, all are settling in city centers. They are buying homes at high prices, gradually changing the urban population map. On paper, Russia's real estate market appears vibrant, but this vibrancy is a mirror of displacement, flight, and forced resettlement, not prosperity. The heart of cities now beats closer to weapons than to knowledge. In the shadow of this transformation, a greater fear is slowly spreading, a second wave of mobilization. The first mobilization in the fall of 2022 was a truly traumatic rupture. Men were taken from their homes in the middle of the night. Farewells at train stations turned into screams, and hundreds of thousands lined up at border crossings to flee. Since that day, the Kremlin has been careful not to mention the word mobilization. But the truth seeps through, undeniable. This task is no longer carried out with a high-profile announcement from Moscow, but through unofficial quotas distributed to regional governors, factory managers, and local bureaucrats. Every city, every factory, every school is given a number, and to reach that number, persuasion, pressure, threats, or outright bribery come into play. The targets include debtors, undocumented migrant workers, young people who have come to the attention of social services due to family problems, the homeless, and those who are too desperate to resist. In other words, the system targets its weakest links. Some are forced to enlist by their families, others volunteer to escape debt, clear their records, or secure social assistance for their children. But this notion of volunteering increasingly turns into irony, because those who return do so having lost not only their bodies but also their souls. Post-traumatic stress disorder, constant alertness, anger outbursts, and the normalization of violence by war drag those who return not to their homes, but to another hell they are forced to carry within themselves. At the same time, another collapse is taking place within Russia's internal structure, a labor crisis. As migration accelerates and the local population is sent to war, a serious shortage is emerging, particularly in sectors such as agriculture, logistics, and construction. Migrants from Central Asia are stepping in to fill this gap. However, they too are both part of and victims of this system. On the one hand, civilian administrators welcome this labor force, because the wheels must keep turning. On the other hand, security forces label migrants as an internal threat, accusing them of terrorism, smuggling, and even economic sabotage. From Moscow to Novosibirsk, from Samara to Vladivostok, routine raids, waves of deportations targeting undocumented migrants, and humiliating checks have become widespread again. In some places, migrants who go to work in the morning are dropped off at the border gate in the evening. This dual pressure mechanism triggers xenophobia among the local population and threatens the sustainability of migrant labor. For those who remain, life is squeezed not only by the fear of war, but also by economic pressure. Russia's GDP growth in the second quarter of 2025 was recorded at only 1.1%. The mining sector shrank, public services contracted, professional services melted away, and wholesale trade faltered. In fact, the only area of the economy still growing is arms production. Because in Russia, you can no longer eat, you can no longer heat your home, you may not even be able to live. But you can buy a new missile. This is not an economy. It is a war store that runs on bullets. There is no electricity, but if you want, you can buy a rocket launcher for your living room. This system is not a reflection of a living society. It is a system that consumes its people in order to sustain the financing of war. Food inflation has exceeded 10.79%. But this is not just a statistic. It is the name of a daily struggle for survival. Food is no longer a necessity in Russia, but a luxury. Bread, milk, eggs, oil. Even the most basic products are now only available at their sticker price for retired workers, single-income families, and low-wage earners. The price of a kilo of potatoes has tripled compared to a year ago. Meat, cheese, yogurt, they are either absent from the shelves or merely a dream to look at and pass by. Even the simplest dish on the table is now unattainable. Weekly fluctuations in products like eggs and vegetables wipe out even the tiny relief a poor family might have found at the beginning of the month within a few days. Inflation may have fallen below 5%, but only for this reason. No one can afford to buy anything other than bread or a candle. And the central bank? It keeps interest rates between 18% and 21%. This is not economic management. It is a form of medieval torture. Even Sberbank, the pride of the state, has been forced to silence its rosy lies. Even Russia's largest public bank has admitted that the economy is sliding into stagnation and that a recession is inevitable if interest rates remain at this level. In short, this is no longer just a war. It is the slow collapse of a system, a society, even a dream of the future. While Ukraine rains fire from the sky, the machine built by the Kremlin loses a cog with every blow. The attacks target not only facilities, but also trust, stability, and the sense of belonging. On one side, refineries reduced to ashes, logistics networks buried in rubble. On the other, displaced households, emptying cities, darkened shop windows. As Russia sends its tanks to the front, it is breeding hunger, fear, and despair in its wake. This war is no longer called a special operation. It is the death notice of an empire rotting from within, written silently and by fire. If this content has opened a window for you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments to show your support. Every interaction you make helps these stories reach more people. See you in new analyses. Stay tuned, because there's much more to be told behind the scenes.